here today a wonderful set of panelists, and they are Iris Margulis, EU Quality Director at Amazon, Jorge Rubio Nava, Global Head at Citi Social Finance, Ola Fadipe, EMEA Director of Recruiting at Google, and Tanya Ballaram, Global Co-Head of Operations Risk and Resiliency at Goldman Sachs. Those are 4 big companies, 4 big names, 4 wonderful people. So very, very excited to see how this goes. Leading the conversation is a good friend and a very good ally, Nishant. Nishant is an MBA student at London Business School. He began his career in strategy consulting with Bain, India. He spent the last 3 years before LBS at a philanthropic and impact advisory organization named Dasra. And there he managed a portfolio of enterprises focused on developing education and health programs for women and adolescent girls across India. Please welcome Nishant and our panel.
Well, thank you so much, Tara. I think that's the nicest she's ever been to me. I should do these things more often, I think. Like she mentioned, I think this is an amazing set of panelists, like big names here. Before the business school students get too excited, this is not a recruiting event. So you've got to say these things. But I'm so excited to be doing this. I think this topic of allyship is something that's very close to my heart. We have amazing panelists here. I think with their rich experiences, we can really hope to get something out of this, something that's actionable for each one of us on what we can all do as an ally in our everyday lives at the workplace and even beyond. I know we are running a little late, so I'm going to try to do less of the talking and get into it. But just a quick housekeeping for everyone in the audience, virtually as well as physically present. We'll have 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. If you could direct it at a specific panelist, that would be great. And you can put that in the chat if you're on Zoom or in person, just hold on to that thought. Perfect. So I think to get you all warmed up first, what I would like to do is open up a question to all the panelists. Our theme for the day, for the conference, is Rising Tides, which is essentially how you support women and women businesses, the society benefits as a whole. So I would like to know from each of you, what does Rising Tides really mean for you? And also if you could share some personal experiences or reasons that motivated you to work towards furthering the cause of gender equity in your career or in your life. Anyone?
I guess I'm going first. It's a great question. When I think about a rising tide, I think of a surge in this space. But I think we've been rising for some time now, but I feel like there's something different at the moment. I feel like there's more accountability in the space. And I think for myself, I've been in the talent game for over 20 years. And you have a front row seat, you have a front row seat into how hiring decisions are made, retention decisions, promotion decisions. You see some great decisions, but unfortunately you see some not so great decisions. And I think that's part of my personal commitment. Like, how can I make sure that organizations make the right decision every time?
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's great to see you all. I'm Tanya, and for me, Rising Tides is about giving back. I feel like I've got to a certain position in my career because other women, other leaders have supported me, and I want to do the same for everyone. I want to share my experience, and I think you can learn a lot from experiences. You can overcome a lot from experiences and learning from them. So it's about learning and sharing and supporting all of us to really fulfill our potential. And I feel strongly about it being a mum of 3. I have 2 sons and a daughter, and it's very important for me to ensure that the world that they're entering into is inclusive, supportive, they get all of the opportunities as well. So I definitely feel a responsibility to share and to help and to support.
Hi everyone, I'm Iris. I'm also really excited to be here. I actually studied here, so I'm MBA 2014, very proud of that. And it's kind of like a circle coming back. So great to be here. Great for the conference. I think personally, I worked in a male-dominated environments throughout my career. I was in the army in Israel. I then worked in the tech and media sector, which are heavily dominated by, men really. And then I'm working in Amazon for the past almost 8 years in operations, again, male-dominated environments. And I think for me, Rising Tides is really about the time that we are right now to make these educated discussions when you are in an environment that doesn't feel right for you. And it's about challenging that and be able to truly do that with confidence, not being with any fear with you, and doing it naturally. Just like they said before me, I mean, we are here in this position because we've done that, and we think that doing it is, can help you to progress further. So happy to talk about that later.
Probably grab this one here so we can share. Thank you. My name is Jorge Rubio. Thank you very much for having me. I feel like a great responsibility being the only male panelist today. To me, Rising Tides, by the way, I love the theme. It's about, lifting all boats, basically. I have to say, or start by saying that my wife is a successful professional. She, by the way, is an LBS alum herself. So, together we've been sort of learning how to, share responsibilities, prioritize both, and advance both our careers, parental responsibilities, personal interests, family and work, travel. I do travel a lot, over 50% of my time, pre-pandemic, obviously, because I work mostly in emerging markets, are, traveling. So how to balance that is something that, in my family, we've managed, and I have to thank you for that as well. But from a professional standpoint, when I joined the bank, I joined the financial sector 25 years ago, back in Mexico City. And it was, as you say, a completely male-dominated environment. But not only that, the market as a whole was hugely underserved. Around 60% of the people, the adults in Mexico, don't have a bank account, or didn't have a bank account, for example. And if you think about it, and this is something that people don't explore further, but if you look at the people that are unbanked, in most emerging markets, the gender gap is huge. In the case of Mexico, it was around 70% of adults without a bank account are women. So I started, getting to know some of the microfinance players in the country, and going deeper into these communities and really understanding why prevented women, in particular, to joining the formal financial system. So social pressure, cultural pressure, owning a bank account is a big thing for some of them. Financial independence. So that's how I sort of got involved with the financial inclusion movement. And I've dedicated my career to development finance, inclusive finance. And there's obviously a huge gender angle in what I do. So that's, I think, if you ask me about a personal and professional reason why I feel deeply about this thing today, it's probably because of that.
Thank you so much. I think it's really good to hear such distinct perspectives from each of you on what you think about the theme, but also what connects you to the cause as well. Tanya, I'm going to put you on the spot because earlier when we were chatting, you mentioned that you've instituted the Allyship chapter in your organization at Goldman. So before we move any further, I would just like to share what happened last night. I was at the pub after the event and was having a drink, and I was telling my friend, "Should come along for this panel I'm doing." And she was like, "Oh, which panel are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing the Allyship panel." And she said, "Is that like Star Trek?" And I was like, we need to define this before we get any deeper into this conversation. So how would you define allyship for someone who maybe has no clue?
Sure. For me, and this is my definition, an ally is someone who really takes time to invest in people, in pushing the cause forward. So this is not just a one-time effort. This is everything you do, right? This is about sponsorship. It's about mentorship. It's about coming to events like this, educating yourself, informing yourself, building trusted advisors around you. I think the thing about allyship, it's a very easy term to band around, but it's a commitment. It should be a commitment, and it should be a lifelong commitment. And so everything you do, you should be thinking about how you're being an ally, and then standing up proud and sharing that, and encouraging your teams. When you're recruiting, thinking about, you know, have I got a diverse panel that I'm recruiting from? How many women have been put forward for me to see and to interview? You know, if this is Women's History Month, if there's no events going on, championing, putting on the events and really, you know, owning this. And so for me, it's about everything you do, and it should be ongoing and continuous and looking at different ways of being an ally. And so for me, it's about continuously educating yourself and thinking about other ways and hearing information too. There's lots of ways to do it, but for me, it's about the ongoing commitment. And particularly in the workplace, you know, our allies are particularly, we choose MD sponsors to be allies because we recognize once you've made it to MD, you know, you have the ability to share, to bring people along, to sponsor, to talk about, you know, particular women who are doing very well, and ensure that, you know, they're being considered when jobs are being offered or when projects are being offered. And your role is really to say, well, have you thought about this person? Or let me tell you about that person, you know, and it's really impactful. I think what you'll find through your careers, the way you'll get your next job is usually through a contact. It's through someone you know, it's through someone who knows you, who talks about you and says, oh, actually, I know this person. And so it's really, I think it's a really important role. I think, you know, we should all be allies and we should all encourage allyship. And you have to talk about it as well, because you have to get feedback and you have to be able to give feedback as well to be able to improve and continuously improve in this space.
Thank you so much for that. I think we couldn't have articulated any better. So it was super useful, at least for one person in the audience for sure, I know. But thank you so much for that. Moving on, I think now that we know what allyship really means and your personal thoughts on it, Olaf, I come to you. So when it comes to being an ally for gender equity, there's often a large gap between what a person thinks, believes that he's an ally or he or she's an ally, and between what they actually do. And often making that jump from belief to action is what makes all the difference. But that's where it's a very tough undertaking. So where do you think the barriers really lie, and how can we effectively engage men to become better allies to women in life?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. So a couple of things come to mind for me. I think, call it naive, but I fundamentally believe people are good and people want to do good. I don't think all people have the tools to do the good, right? So for me, it's about what are those tools, uncovering those tools, and then equipping people with those tools. I say people, but I think the work that I'm most proud of is the work that I do with men who are leaders, right? Because that is the space of influence that I particularly enjoy, like being able to build a trusted relationship, become a trusted advisor, because what that does is it means that I now have the platform to call you out when I need to, right? And I don't do it publicly. It's not for everyone's consumption, but as part of our relationship, I need to be able to tell you in that meeting, you didn't give credit where credit was due. You didn't surface that woman's impact. You didn't surface that woman's contribution. Or the next time we do this, I would suggest you do X and I would suggest you do Y. That's the piece for me that really matters. Like, you've got to be able to hold leaders accountable. You also have to remind leaders that the job is not what it says on the job description. The job is much bigger. It's growing the shape and face of the organization, right? So you've got your day job, which is what it says on your LinkedIn, but building the representation of your organization, making sure that it is a diverse, inclusive, and equitable environment, that's the job. That's the stuff of legacy. That's the stuff that makes you wake up in the morning and do it every day.
Thank you so much. And I think accountability, I think that's usually resurfaces as a theme in a lot of these allyship conversations. And it's something that I think we can all take back as an actionable thought. Iris, if I could get your thoughts. So we speak about men being allies very often in society and all these in these conferences, but at the same time, I think we can't ignore the fact that women, especially those in positions of power, privilege, have a role to play as allies as well. So how do you think women can support other women become better allies?
And I will start just as a comment to what was just mentioned, because a lot of you are students. And I think the comment here is not relevant only to the boardroom or, you know, when you're in the corporate life, but actually in class. And I remember that from school. And like, raise your voice if you hear someone that didn't give credit where it was due, right? Or if a professor, doesn't matter which gender they are not commenting in an appropriate way. That's being an ally, right? That's what you can make an impact in everything you do, right? Not only at work, it's also on the bus, and it's also on the tube, and it's also in your class. And I think as readiness to become the leaders, right, that, you know, will be able to then truly change direction of a company is to, you know, to action it now, right? Don't wait, and don't just, you know, text it to your friend. Hey, why didn't they say that, right? But do it now. But to be, you know, you asked me about women and what we can do for each other. I think one thing that we do in Amazon, and I really like, and I emphasize that a lot, is about sharing success stories, your success stories, and being vocal about it. And I read somewhere that your progress is still progress if nobody else validates it. Right? And there's something really strong in that, right? When you share a success story, right, it's out there in the open, right? When we're so luckily outside of COVID, and we speak not only virtually, but physically to each other, the reflection that we get by the sound that we do, by talking what we do, is so different. And I think women tend to just be shy, right? And maybe talk less, right? No reason for that, right? Even if your English is not native, or if you don't feel comfortable, or if you're not the senior in the room, right? So I think sharing success stories is something that's very important. And the other thing that we as women, I encourage us to do more is actually listening, right? Maybe if you're on the other edge and you tend to talk a lot, right? Probably the strongest skill you can get is by listening, right? And by understanding the other person, understanding what's going on in the room will give you such a, you know, great ammunition to do the negotiation, to be able to solve the problems that are there just by being maybe the only woman in the room, right? So listening rather than potentially always, talking. So some thoughts on this.
Thank you so much. And Jorge, if you could probably chime in, what can men themselves do, maybe to build this skill and build this muscle to become better allies, according to you? I'm sorry, you're the only man on the panel, so I'm going to get your perspective.
Well, I think with some men, there is this fear, I would say, and this archaic belief that by elevating women, someone is losing out on an opportunity, which I find completely ridiculous, by the way, because I, dedicate my life to gender investing, and I see it all the time. But I think that exists in a way. So I think we need to understand, all of us, that it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody wins, and in my work, it's pretty obvious. I was reading a World Bank report saying that if we close the gender gap, global GDP could grow by 2-3%. So that's around 2.3 trillion dollars that we add to the economy. 400 million jobs would be created. So at a macro level, the gains are huge. But also, if you look at the teams and the companies or industries, for example, in VC and private equity. It's been proven, and I've seen it from a Boston Consulting report, that when the senior investment teams are gender balanced, returns are 20 to 30% higher. In the startups world, for those of you that are entrepreneurs, companies founded by women, for every dollar that's invested in them, they generate 78 cents. And for companies that are founded by men, it's only 31 cents. Again, that's Boston Consulting, not me. So I think that concept of win-win, and that connects to the theme of this conference, the rising tides. It's very appropriate, and I think we need to understand that everybody wins, and again, it's not a zero sum.
Thank you. I mean, and I didn't give him notes to say at the conference. These are his words. But thank you, brought on the theme so well in your answer. Thank you so much for that. But I think you also segued into what I wanted to go into next, which is shifting the lens to the corporate world. You mentioned the BCG report about how women don't win because in the current environment, right? And there is a 2018 Harvard study which showed that when men are deliberately engaged in gender inclusion programs at work, 96% of the women in those organizations perceive real progress, compared to only 30% of women in organizations without any strong male engagement. And that's a large difference. So Iris, since you mentioned in Amazon, you had a lot of support and there were a lot of, I think, processes in place that support women. Could you probably comment on some of the systems and processes that worked very well and are successful in a large company like Amazon?
Sure, happy to do that. And we have a great Amazon group just here on the first row that you can chat afterwards and, you know, ask. But I want to share something about our affinity groups and then something about our parental leave. So I think from affinity groups, many corporates have them, right? It's a way to bring together employees from different businesses, from different geographies, and have executive sponsors or allies supporting them, and really create a community, right? So we have 13 large affinity groups. Again, they're worldwide, and then there are local chapters, women at Amazon, women at operations. We have Black Employee Network. We have families at Amazon. We have LGBTQ. We have, veterans and military affinity group, which is very strong. And each of those communities create and generate with a lot of freedom in the company, and they create workshops and seminars and talks and newsletters and education training, anything that you want. Obviously there is a committee for each one of those affinity groups, but most importantly there is freedom to really do what you think is the right thing for that affinity group, with competitions and a lot of support from the business. And I think that I've used obviously the women at Amazon and women at operations, and kind of like being active there also in the military, kind of like allyship affinity group, and something very anecdotal and very relevant. We have also an affinity group for families, so parents, right, or people that have children, and one of the newsletters that they just, I think, received yesterday had some links on how to explain I have 2 kids, a 2 and a 4-year-old, and there was a link on how to explain your kids the situation in Ukraine, right? And these are the kind of really impactful things that, at the end change the way that you communicate to your kids. It changes the discussion that you might have with your team members. And I think it's a very powerful way for us in the business to talk about not only work and make a difference in people's life. And the other thing is, much more policy, right? Like we have maternity and parental leave, very kind of, accommodating. And one of the things that for me were relevant is not only like the flex, way to return to work, but also the physical environment, right? So I came back from my second maternity leave very shortly after I gave birth, so 3 months. I was still breastfeeding. And in the corporate office, although I led a team in operations, I used to come once a week to the corporate office, the mother's room was, had everything I needed. And one day I forgot something in the pumping machine, and they had those things, right? I didn't need to worry about it. And by allowing us to just do what we need to do as parents, right? And giving us those resources, something really helped me to come back to work and be efficient in my work. And one more anecdote is in Germany, actually, if you're taking your parental leave over 2 months, you get a bonus from the business. And again, it's and that's very new, right? My team member told me, I lead a team also in Germany, and I was like, wow, like that's so encouraging. And we really want to create the role models in this environment. So I think we have more, much longer way to go, but we're making the right steps.
That's very heartening to hear that an organization of such size has these processes in place, and it gives us hope. And you brought up an interesting point around maternity leave. And often feminist groups quote the maternity leave as the root cause behind this entire gender pay gap, and how employers hire men instead of women, or even, I think, promote women instead of men. And we saw this earlier when Nav was presenting as well. And Tanya, you mentioned as well, while you were at Goldman, you became a mother and you came back to work, and you I think, liked that experience. And I guess if you could talk through that, how was your experience? And also if you could touch upon, for organizations of tomorrow, how should they address this whole maternity leave debate?
That's right. I had 3 maternity leaves, which I'm proud to say, and I did take a year off for each of those. And, it can be difficult. It's a great time in your life, but you in the back of your mind, you're thinking, will my job be there? Will it not? And luckily for me, I work in a firm where I was given all the assurances, go off, enjoy your maternity leave. You can come back in. They had 10 days that I could come back in and, be connected with the business, be connected with my team, which was great. And my experience has been great, and so much so I did it 3 times. The good thing about Goldman Sachs is that they're very supportive of families. You talk about how to drive equity in this space, and one of the things they have done is ensured that all parents get 26 weeks paid leave. Like, why not? Whether you've adopted, whether you're father, mother, it doesn't matter. And I think we need to do that and more. So I took a full year off. I encourage, the fathers in my team to take the paid leaves when they're having a baby or they're adopting a baby. And, we've had quite a few team members take that up, and it's great. It's something to be celebrated. And, we encourage more men to take that time as well. It's a beautiful time to be at home with your newborn. But it's, you have the anxiety about when you're coming back after a year off, right? You've got to integrate yourself back into the business. You've got to put everything back on again when you've been in your trainers for a year. But the support was great. Goldman Sachs also gives us, 20 days of childcare. So I could bring the baby in with me for the first few weeks whilst I was just integrating back into the firm. And again, all of the facilities were absolutely there. And we have an on-site childcare, which helps, and also, I mean, even as we manage through this pandemic, I have a nanny now that helps us look after the children. When she got sick, they sent someone home to help me, because, the thing is that you're at home, but you still need someone to look after the children. So it's very important that we support families, full stop, right? They're the future as well. And I encourage businesses to do that because, there's definitely benefit and payback. I feel more committed to my firm because of how they've supported me. My husband does as well. I encourage that we continue to do that and do more. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. Ola, if I could come to you next. You spoke about this in your answer earlier about leaders and how they should behave at the workplace, right? So if you look at this room right now, I think these are your leaders who are going to go on and lead the future businesses of tomorrow. They might not look it right now, but I'm sure
they look it right now. They look it right now. It's quite a scary thing.
No, but I think I would like to get your opinion on, so the fact of the matter is that even though we've come a long way, there still exists an unconscious bias of men in career and women in family, right? And people are often unaware about the magnitude of the impact that it has on women at the workplace. So what would your advice be for the future CEOs of tomorrow? How can we act in a manner that can cultivate an environment that promotes allyship and also dispels all these biases? So what would be those skills that distinguishes a good leader as a champion of equity versus others?
Really hard question.
You get the best gifts.
I think I'll answer that in 2 ways. Okay, so I think professionally, right? So as a leader, you set the tone for the organization. That's what you do. You set the tone. But I also think it's incumbent on you to hold a microscope to all of your processes, all of your policies, because some might be out of date. Some might not make sense in today's environment. So you need to constantly review. But you also need to look at those processes and policies, I guess the structure of your organization, and ask yourself, is this really achieving what I want it to achieve? And that can be hard. I certainly know for me, when I have, come into organizations to lead teams or inherited teams, whatever circumstance I find myself in, I find myself really getting down into the weeds of what does, from a talent perspective, what does an external candidate, how do they integrate and experience my organization? So I might think it's all great, right? But if I put myself in your shoes, like sitting in the audience now, have you found it cumbersome? Have you found it easy? Have you found that it's a process that sees and understands who you are? And I think that is really important to do. So professionally, I think taking apart those policies and processes is really key. I think personally, if I could go there, I think your choice of partner matters. It matters greatly, more than people tell you. It's the most important thing, right? When you need to get on a plane, when you need to travel, when you need to go for that job, when you need to make a sacrifice, you need to know that somebody's got your back. Somebody's got home, somebody's got the kids, somebody's got the house, and vice versa, right? But that is something that I don't think they teach at business school. And they shouldn't, that'd be weird. It'd be super weird. But I do think it really does matter, right? So I remember having my second son. And I had, unlike you, I came back and the job was gone. And it had gone to somebody that I had mentored and trained, and I love her dearly, and she's still in my life today. So it wasn't an issue between us, but the job had gone. And I had a sponsor in New York who said to me, get on a plane, go to New York. And my baby then was 10 months old. I was like, how can I get on a plane? How can I get on a plane? And I remember my husband saying to me, you will get on that plane. Because he was like, I would get on that plane. And you would tell me to get on that plane. So get on that plane. And he said to me, I said, but what will they think of me? Right? I left a 10-month-old in London, and here I am in New York. And he said to me, tell them you left the baby with me. And that made all the difference, right? And I think that is something that you must consider alongside everything else, because those tough decisions will come, those tough moments will come, and you need to make sure that you have someone like a Jorge that will have your back.
Well, thank you. This is why I give you the tough questions, these gems of answers, and empathy and choosing the right partner. But I think that's very true in the way you explained it, really brought it to life as well. And I think, Tanya, if I could probably come back to you. So there was another interesting survey, and I was, honestly, when I was researching allyship, I found such interesting, eye-opening statistics. It blew my mind. But a 2019 survey conducted by leanin.org, for those of you who don't know, it's a women empowerment website started by Facebook COO, Sheryl Sandberg. It revealed that in the post-Me Too era, 60% of male managers say they are not comfortable mentoring, socializing, or even working alongside women in the workplace. And this is not far back, it's literally 2019. So what would your advice be to people who feel this way, and how can they get over their fears? If you could call it that.
I know, that's a big question. And I'd be interested to see who responded to that, because I think that's a very American-centric, probably, point. But listen, we're all in this together, right? So I think if I was to offer any advice, it would be to get over your fear. Have the trusted advisors. Who are you going to ask? It's very important to widen your network. If you don't have, trusted women that you can ask questions to in your team, outside your team, then find them. It's really important, and it's important to ensure that you are broadening the people that you're interacting with. It shouldn't just be, the males in your business. These days, it's very important to be part of the program, and the program is, gender equity and inclusion and diversity. And so if you don't know about that, then get to know about it. Turn up to these sessions, ask the questions, and don't be afraid to ask the questions, and then bring a mate with you, right? If you find safety in numbers, then bring a mate with you. But I wouldn't, I think not addressing the issue is the wrong thing to do. I think not having the conversation, not challenging yourself, and there will be impactful females in your life regardless, daughters, mothers, sisters, friends. There are people who are here to support you and help you through those journeys. But, ask the difficult questions, because we're happy to answer them, and we're happy to talk about this stuff. And I can't wait till we get back to a point where Thursday night drinking is back on the agenda, and hopefully we're on our way there. But it's so important. It's so important to socialize with your team. when you're in it together, you deliver so much more. So if you want to be an effective leader, you've got to address these points on the head, and you've got to really challenge yourself to get over those fears.
I think that's the perfect challenge yourself to get over those fears. Could put on a t-shirt, to be honest. But Iris, I think since we heard all this conversation about how men feel about this in the post-Me Too era, I think most of us here are privileged enough to be entering places of work, air-conditioned offices and glass buildings. And it's often places that I think value allyship at a certain level, or at least think about women empowerment, right? But often I think people who work in warehouses or operation centers, fulfillment centers, I think you built out Amazon's fulfillment centers and an operations team in Europe, right? Which are predominantly, like you mentioned, male-dominated office areas. So how was your experience like at Amazon? And more importantly, how did you as a leader manage to foster such an inclusive culture in warehouses or operation centers where there are people often from different socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, and how do you ensure that they still feel supported?
I'll answer that, but I want to recognize that there are baby sounds in the room, and it's wonderful to hear, and you should stick around. Don't leave the room. Like, it's pleasant to the ear, so stick around as long as they want to. But so what do we do? I mean, I think we do a lot, and I'm very humble, like to share. You know, I lead a very large organization, 10,000 people across EU, and I think it's in everything we do. Right? It's in what I say, and it's, you know, if I come in with a smile or with an agenda, like that transcends. And we have site leaders and general managers here. And again, that if you want to hear more from their experiences, please do that, because I think it's also a very personal one. I think the span of influence we have as leaders in the fulfillment centers, in the operational environment, is just so much wider because of the amount of people that we lead, and that's something very unique. So I come with a lot of humbleness, I think, to be able to answer this question. What we do, so let's start with the way that we work, right? So every day we start our day with our team with a short brief, and we talk about a safety tip, a quality tip, and then a DEI tip. Right, in every briefing, right, twice a day. That's what we do. We talk about diversity or any kind of equity or inclusion tip. And that's something, it's in everything we do. We give courses, right, to our team members, a lot of women empowerment courses that you can register, and that's voluntary in operations, right, to female talent that we want to emphasize, but also to men, right? And when we do that across the board, we publish that, and it's something very ingrained. I think the other thing that we do, and it's important to, I think, to mention that I feel is critical, is in Amazon we have this leadership principle called earn trust. And I can, you know, share from my personal experience when I joined Amazon. You know, came to the fulfillment center with this young MBA grad. You know, what do you know, right? Like, who are you to tell us what to do? And in earn trust, we say that leaders listen attentively, speak candidly, right? And they really treat others with respect. And when you do that, doesn't matter what gender you are and what are your beliefs. It's something that kind of like puts us in a working environment in the same place. And I feel the ability to earn trust in our operational environment, which is truly merit-based and nothing else, right, is what helps us to be a diverse organization. I think the other thing that we do is really to try to attract more women to our operations. It is a male-dominated, but we're making big strides, really, really big strides on that. And I think, to refer to what I said in the beginning, sharing the success stories, we're trying to share more what we do, but also share the profiles of the, you know, leaders that we have, and what backgrounds they have and the challenges they came across. So I think that's something we do. And I think personally, you know, I had very, you know, challenging environments. You know, when I launched LC2, a very large 2 million square, you know, feet building outside of London, you know, challenges from engineering and mechanical and people. And, you know, we changed transport networks, right, to be able to bring thousands of people to the building. And you find yourself really as the only woman in the room, but it really is not that's not the topic, right? The topic is what you do, what impact you have on the communities that are around you, what impact you have for our customers. And I think, you know, we all kind of like refer to the same thing, that it's in the way that you carry yourself, which is what's important, and being confident in doing so. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of gems of advice there. Respect being the center of, I think, providing that space for people to flourish. And now we can't have a panel in these times without talking about the pandemic, as depressing as it might seem. But we are aware that the disproportionate impact that the pandemic and more importantly, remote working had on professional working women, right? And companies were scurrying to figure out what to do and how to support them. I think, Jorge, I think if I could probably get your view on this, how did Citi Social Finance, I think, respond to this pandemic and how when we went virtual to support women both internally within the organization as well as through your business activities?
Thank you. Well, I guess there's two sides of this question. The first one is internally, how we reacted internally to a very challenging environment, obviously. I think, I don't think that's the only reason, but the fact that we have, for example, a female CEO for the first time in a global bank that talks about empathy all the time. And you mentioned empathy, which is hugely important in this topic. She came with very interesting ideas. So she said she recognized that at the peak of the first wave, people were super stressed. So she said, you know what? Fridays, do not Zoom. No one is going to Zoom in on Friday. So as a rule, or things like take a day off. All the organization, I've been working for this bank for 25 years. I've never seen anything like that. Everyone take a day off, relax, chill out. And then, nothing's going to happen. Let's come back refreshed. Or use an hour in the day where you can disconnect and do something else, physical activity, whatever. Limit your calls to 45 minutes, your Zoom calls. Don't do more than, it's not productive. If you don't do it in 45 minutes, probably, you can't, it's not a real objective. So things like that, I think were very helpful, and also support the morale of the organization. So those I think were Jane's ideas. So I think it has to do, again, empathy. Having a female leader gives you a different perspective. Now the other side to your question is what we do externally. Interestingly, during the pandemic, we issued our first social bond as a bank. It was a $1 billion transaction where we said the proceeds of this bond are going to be used to finance healthcare, education, financial inclusion, smallholder farmer financing in emerging markets, affordable housing, and of all of that, a huge gender angle to that. Mm-hmm. So this is the first time that we do it for emerging markets. And I think it's a huge commitment from us as well, because we're telling the market we're going to be frequent issuers of this bond. So we're going to be allocating capital to these projects around the world. And we made public, and if you want to have a look, I think it's an interesting document, to be quite honest. It's a social finance framework, basically defines very well where we allocate the resources. So during the pandemic as well, we made a public commitment to reach 10 million women by 2025 through our funding. So this is not our philanthropy, this is our business saying we're going to be financing companies that benefit low-income women in emerging markets. And we're going to be accountable for that, and we're going to track it, and it's going to be 10 million women of 15 million low-income households, 10 million women. The other thing that we did is, because we do a lot of business with microfinance banks and entities that reach the last mile. They were having problems, some of them, getting liquidity. We supported that, and it did not stop our lending. Obviously, we were monitoring the portfolio quality of our clients, something from a risk perspective you need to do, but we were supporting their liquidity as well. So these loans to, working capital loans to women didn't stop from flowing, because people in India couldn't meet, right? And they couldn't repay, but they needed the loans to survive, and their businesses to continue to thrive. So that's another thing that we did. So I think that the pandemic, it was as challenging as it was, gave us, good lessons, and some of these practices have come to stay. It has, in terms of the workplace, it has added flexibility. This empathy that I'm speaking about, it's something that's become now useful and the norm, to have greater flexibility, to do things in a different way, and to support each other, basically.
Thank you. I think, thanks so much again, the emerging market perspective as well, because I think that's overlooked in a lot of these conversations we have in this part of the world. We're running close to the end of the session. So I know I have a bunch of questions, but I do want to open it up. So before we go to the audience, if you could just get maybe just 1 or 2 sentences from each of you. If I need to start, I don't know where to start being an ally. If I need to wake up tomorrow morning, where can I begin? What should I start doing? What should I stop doing? So maybe 2 to 3 sentences. And Ola, maybe we start with you.
I think to effectively be an ally, you have to take yourself out of the conversation. So I would say, don't center yourself in the conversation. Seek to understand what's going on. Seek to educate yourself. And you have no excuse, right? Google is your friend. It's all out there for you, right? So I think it's really, really important that you make sure that you do the work. Do the work.
Do the work.
For me, it's about networking, reach out, find someone to reach out to and say, what would allyship mean to you? How can I be an ally for you? So yeah, reach out.
I think for me it's about honesty. And it's about thinking about ourselves. And sometimes as women, we think we're, superheroes, we can juggle everything and do everything. But we are also like human beings. So I think about it as like human heroes and about creating that in everyone that we meet and bringing them along with us to a journey of, having more equality in our society.
Yeah, I agree with that. First thing, honesty. You have to recognize you have an issue most times. So, for example, the bank 5 years ago, made public their pay equity gap, their pay gap for gender, and then we put forward goals, basically representation goals, and I think we have, achieved those. For example, in the last 3 years, it went from 37% to 40% in women in AVP to MD positions. I mean, there's a lot of work to do, but you start by recognizing that you have an issue and setting yourself ambitious goals and going for it. And then the second is on you mentioned the affinity groups, which I think is very important. Well, we have a model in the bank where in those affinity groups, whether it is gender, LGBT, race, whatever it might be, there's always a co-head, which is the ally, right? So it is a question of us, not them. So that's the other sort of idea that comes to mind.
Thank you. Very impactful words from each one of you. If you could open up the audience, I think there should be runners, so you can raise your hand and if you can direct the question to one panelist, that'd be great. Someone there.
Thank you. My name is Laura. I'm a final year math and physics student at UCL, and my question is mostly directed towards Jorge. So I'm really inspired by how Citi social finance is making a positive impact in the world. And my question is, with limited time and funding, but so many challenges to tackle, how do you decide on what initiatives and social enterprises to focus your efforts on? And how do you set goals that are ambitious yet realistic within those limitations?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And Citi is a very unique place, as these companies represented in this panel. We're all global. We are in our case 100 markets, of which 52 are emerging markets. So the needs are huge, the gaps are huge. So what we did is try to understand what's the value that we can add to the system in terms of a local currency capabilities, the globality of the bank, this ability to connect investors in the developed markets to companies in emerging markets. What can we do and which sectors we can support? So we created this framework to understand the frameworks that we would act in, and define the partners that we want to work with, and develop the tools, internal tools to understand them, analyze them, assess them, and pump funding to the projects that we believe are scalable. That's a very important concept in what we do, is scale. Something that cannot be scaled or replicated, it's probably something that we shouldn't prioritize.
All right. This is a question in the back.
Hi, you were talking about maternity leave and how you manage it and how to be an ally in the job. But you make me wonder, how do you manage to be an ally from the other side, from the side of the employer? You want to give your people a year of maternity leave and paternity leave, but how do you manage the work? I cannot ask the other people to work more. Can I hire someone, or how does this work from that side?
Yeah, I can start, and then I can start. So I think the question was about, you know, your ally programs enable you to afford parents to take a year off. How do you manage the work? If I understood correctly, how do you manage the work whilst, you know, you have parents off for a year? And you know, it does require managing. At any given time, somebody is off sick or away or long-term sick or absent, and you do need to manage the workload accordingly. So we do either hire in a temporary worker to cover some of the items, and we manage our workload accordingly. So it does require planning and organizing. But we make it work, and it has worked. And so it's something that then creates a sense of belonging with the firm. So when that person comes back, you know, they're happy people, they're excited, they want to be part of the business. And we think that the, you know, the return of that is so much, you know, it's worth doing. So it requires organization, it requires planning. Sometimes it requires hiring in someone to support the business, but essentially we make it work. Anyone else want to add to that?
Happy to add. Yeah, I mean, in Amazon, we do the same across the board. Like you would hire someone for a contract of 9 months or a year. Actually, the UK law tells us as employers that we're not allowed to ask for how long you want to go for maternity leave. You just need to tell us when you want to come back. And that's something very favorable on the UK law. There are other things that make it favorable. For example, you don't have to tell your employer that you're pregnant, or if you're not a woman, right? If you're a man and for some reason you're adopting, only up to, I think it's week 24, so relatively advanced in your kind of like carrying a child. So in a sense, we do hire, and I think my experience in Amazon is that you completely transfer ownership. So it's not like, you know, for your question, you know, how do you manage? It's not someone is overburdened with work, but someone else is doing the job. So either when you come back, you're just going to get it back. And the other point I want to add is that from my experience is that we actually use that as a development opportunities for our employees and for our team members, right? And people that are stepping for roles for a 9 month, 6 months period actually get the opportunity to expand what they do, to do maybe something different. And then this lets them to be promoted or helps to support what they want to do next. So it's actually an excellent opportunity to fill the role and not, you know, just leave a gap.
Thank you. Any more questions? There's someone there. It's a large room. It's coming.
Thank you so much for being here today. I happen to agree with Jorge's point that on the whole, gender empowerment is not a zero-sum game, but I think sometimes in a micro situation, like one role being hired for or one promotion being available, that sometimes, unfortunately, we've still heard as LBS students, our male classmates saying, you know, oh, they gave the job to a woman or something of that sort, even when these men see themselves on the whole as an ally. So I'm curious what your advice would be to men in those situations when they feel as though they're put in more of a competitive situation, and that their personal, you know, ambition is somehow being compromised. Thank you.
I guess this one is for me. Yes, I mean, that is obviously, there's still a bit of tension. We are not where we have to be yet. But, you know, I think people eventually will understand that, and we will achieve what, you know, the title of the conference, no, this equality, that it doesn't really matter. It's about who has the best skills, who's best positioned to do the job. As we make progress, I do believe that we will get to a point where it will be all these promotions, things that you're discussing or describing will happen purely on a skills basis. But that's, again, something that's, I think, work in progress. That would be my view. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I think if you're in that situation and you hear that statement, I will lead with the empathy again. I think a person's hurting, right? They're hurting. And I think both things can be true. They can be deeply, deeply disappointed that they missed out on an opportunity that they wanted, but it doesn't equate to the conclusion that they're drawing, right? So I think I would offer up that, like, this is not, you can process your, I guess in a sense, your sense of loss, your sense of grief in not getting the position, but at the same time, you have to decenter yourself because it isn't about you. It is about that individual that got the position, and there is the next position for you. Like, it's just, careers are very long, very long. There are going to be many things you don't get. There are going to be many things that pass you by, but then there are many things that come your way. So losing your, I'm not allowed to say that word, in that moment is probably not the best approach to have, because it's not building the resilience you need for the onward journey. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I just want to end on one last note. If any one of you could, I think hope is very important to inspire people and inspire change. So if you have observed any positive examples of change in society that give you hope for a better future, if you could end on that, anyone. Since you have the mic, why don't you go?
I have the mic. I started out my career on a trading floor, which was just all men, all men. And even just a walk from my desk to the bathroom was just, oh my God, I have to get up and walk. It was hard. And you flash forward many, many years, and I have two sons. I don't have a daughter. I have two sons, and they are 12 and 9. It is fascinating to me how they do not think things are a big deal. You know, like, they're just like, of course women can do that. Why do you think? I'm like, no, it's the first woman. And they're like, no, it's not Kamala Harris. No, it's not. I was like, look this up. This is the first woman. That gives me hope. That gives me hope that we are raising a generation that thinks there are no barriers, there are no limits, and they see that representation. Now, it says to me that there's work to be done still, because like I said, they're 9 and 12, but the question is about hope, and that gives me hope.
Thank you.
I like your answer, Ola. I don't know if I can top that, but I agree with you. I think the generations, the discourse that I see now in terms of how people are standing up, when I was growing up, I never protested, but I never used my voice as much as you can do now with social media. And so what gives me hope is all of you all using your voice and, demanding more of society. And we're seeing that more and more now. And I think you're right. I look forward to the generations coming up behind us and just continuing to have the conversation and continuing to push the boundaries. So that gives me a lot of hope. So thank you.
I think I want to share something that I carry with me from COVID, right? COVID was a pandemic and ruins many, many people's life, but it also exposed us to a lot of challenges we have. And one of the things we did in Amazon, I think really in the midst of the lockdown, is to, so one of the affinity groups were asking from women leaders and men leaders to take videos from themselves from home. And I remember my son was like, 5 months old. So I did it like at 9 p.m. when everyone was like in their rooms. And we just talked about how challenging it is to work from home and where you don't have any childcare or anything else. And that truthness that came in the videos from VPs and from very senior directors and country leaders, to see them in their house, just talking about, how tough it is. For me, that's the future, right? It's about being able to talk about it freely without any judgment. And I think the other thing I'm thinking about is that we're going to face now, and your generation of leadership will face a different kind of challenges that we are not equipped right now, that they're not teaching you in the LBS classes maybe, because that's what I feel now, that the challenges I'm facing are not the one that I thought they will be. And I think those skills, those organizational behavior skills, and the ability to argue with, your classmate they talked to you about, this was given to a woman because she's a woman, or something similar, is the kind of inspirational and stimulating discussions you should have now to be able to be prepared to what's next, because that's super exciting.
I guess, I would agree with all of you that when you talk about hope, you need to refer to the next generation. So one of the things that I love the most about my job is that I get to travel and visit low-income communities across the world and see my clients, which are, institutions that are serving the underserved. And one image that I have in my mind very clear, and I think exemplifies this, is when I was in a rural community in the south of Mexico. There was this lady that was being helped by her little daughter to use the app that for the first time this microfinance bank gave them, so that she could start interacting with the bank and doing her transactions. So it's a very nice image of a little girl supporting her mother get access to finance through an app.
I absolutely love all those stories, and I think they were so inspiring. I think, and that's what we all want to hear in a hope for a better future. So I'm getting a lot of daggers from the eyes from Tara, so I need to end this event soon enough because we're over time. But please join me in giving a round of applause to all of my panelists. I think they've been amazing. Thank you. Hopefully that was an educational experience for all of us and we take back something actionable. And yeah, I'm hoping all of you to be better allies starting tomorrow. You have no excuse now, so you have to do it. All right, thank you.
I swear there were no daggers. There were no daggers. That was an absolute lie. I was not shooting daggers at you. Come on. Only because you're you, not because of the time. Okay, so